Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are going to be lots of lessons from this episode, and I think one of the biggest ones is one that we keep not learning, and that is we don't understand other cultures. And Mr. Nasser, I think you started your testimony talking about we think everybody thinks like us, and everybody wants to be a liberal democracy, and everybody wants to have elections, and everybody wants to have a structure, and we don't understand the ethnic divisions, the sending Tajik troops to Pashtun areas, this is more of a comment than a question, but it seems to me this is something Americans, we get that wrong. Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, that's one of the fundamental errors of American foreign policy is thinking and not understanding other cultures. Here's my question. Mr. Nasser, you testified, the quote was, Doha ended the war. And I think that's really important, that the die was cast when the administration agreed. Number one, they made a deal with the Taliban excluding the Afghan government entirely. And number two, it was a fixed May 1st, 2021, American troops are going to be out. That was our war in Afghanistan was over when that agreement was signed. Now, President Biden could have reversed it. I understand that, but that was the crucial moment, was it not, in terms of the beginning of the collapse of the morale of the Afghan government and the Afghan military? And there was the only real condition was that there would be negotiations, which never occurred, and we didn't enforce, as near as I can tell. Is that correct? Wasn't the Doha agreement that was the end of the war in all practical senses?
Yes, Senator. That's my understanding. That when Doha agreement, first of all, the negotiations already send a very powerful signal to the region that the United States was willing to negotiate with the Taliban directly. And that was obviously very different from our attitudes towards the Taliban for over the past 15 years. And secondly, that we did arrive at an agreement. The agreement was around a ceasefire and an exit of the United States from Afghanistan.
And people talk about it being conditions-based, but the conditions were pretty vague and they were never enforced. The only real condition was not harboring al-Qaeda and negotiations with the Afghan government, neither one of which occurred. And I asked the generals that were here the other day, were there any efforts to enforce those conditions or to pause the withdrawal? And the answer I got was no. So let me ask this question. If President Biden had decided in April to abrogate the Doha agreement, number one, what would have happened with regard to the Taliban's ceasefire with the Americans? And number two, what would have been required in order to return to a situation where the Afghan government could retain some measure of control? In other words, where would we have had to go? I think your testimony, Mr. Jocelyn, was 2,500 troops wasn't going to do it. Clearly, there would have had to have been an escalation of our presence. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The 2,500 troops were only viable at that point in time because there was a ceasefire. In fact, the 2,500 troops were not permitted for under the Doha agreement. So in a sense, we would have needed even a force protection plan to just protect those 2,500, and then there could be a military assessment to see how many more troops would have needed to stabilize the situation and give the Afghan government breathing room. I would say that when the Doha agreement started, we had multiples of that, close to 30,000 troops, perhaps more, and we still were not able to stave off the Taliban offensive.
Was this mission doomed almost from the beginning?
My testimony was that there were strategic problems with our approach right after we toppled the Taliban in 2001 that sowed the seeds of an insurgency that we were never able to control.
Mr. Jocelyn, you talked about the resurgence of al-Qaeda, and I don't doubt it. I think you're absolutely right, and it's certainly going to be a problem, and I think the over-the-horizon solution is being oversold. On the other hand, the whole safe havens argument, the trouble with that is we'd have troops everywhere. I mean, there's safe havens potentially in Mali, in Syria, in Yemen. How should we react to the trying to control al-Qaeda when it's now metastasized throughout the Middle East and, in fact, into Africa?
Senator, it's a valid point. We've tracked how the al-Qaeda has spread out over time to those areas you just mentioned, and it's not. It is the case that today al-Qaeda would not need to train the 9/11 hijackers, let's say, in Afghanistan the way they did in the late 1990s and 2000. You can go to the 9/11 Commission report. All 19 were trained there. They could get training in a number of different places now. The problem is that Afghanistan now is the only one of those areas I can think of where the government is al-Qaeda's ally. And so they have a special amount of protection that they don't have in those other areas, where they have local adversaries that they have to fend off in those other areas that they don't necessarily have to fend off now in Afghanistan, other than the remnants of ISIS, and I'll use remnants there, remnants of ISIS in Afghanistan. And I think the other point is that this is a boon for them in terms of their messaging. Remember, the jihadis have a strategic ideological problem, which is that they weren't able to win anywhere. They weren't able to actually, ISIS lost its caliphate.
ISIS was a collapse.
Right, it collapsed. Now they've won. And now they have a victory message to go out and say, we won here in Afghanistan. Not only did the Soviets lose to the Mujahideen the first time around, to Jalaluddin Haqqani, by the way, but his son, Sirajuddin Haqqani, now defeated the Americans the second time around. That's a pretty powerful message.
My time is up. If there's any one phrase that summarizes what happened, is the Taliban saying that the Americans have the watches, but we have the time.
Absolutely.
That's what happened. Thank you.